And finally, new rule of all the ways America continues to divide itself. Nowhere is it more pronounced than in gender. And until the Democrats come to grips with that, they won't have much success winning elections. Let's just put it out there. Women are the Democrats' base, and men who get hit in the head for a living are Trump's.
Something unusual happened on live television this week. Bill Maher didn't simply criticize the Democrats. He took a hard look at what went wrong. There were no cheap jokes about AOC, no routine shots at Bernie Sanders, and no easy attempts to provoke conservatives. Instead, Maher delivered a serious breakdown of a political party that once held enormous power, but now seems unable to get its own house in order. And the most surprising part? Maher wasn't even the strongest voice in the conversation. Rahm Emanuel was sitting there, quietly agreeing, with the look of someone watching a familiar story fall apart in front of him. What followed felt less like a standard political discussion, and more like a brutally honest examination of how the Democratic Party got to this point.
Finally, new rule, it's never too early to strategize. Democrats have been having a lot of donor retreats lately where liberal strategists hold ideathons, where they try to figure out why they keep losing elections. You know, apart from using words like ideathon. And now one idea that's getting a lot of attention is the Dems need to find their Joe Rogan, a liberal Joe Rogan, because that's why Kamala lost. Republicans have a podcast. Okay, maybe. Or you could consider this. Instead of conjuring up a new Joe Rogan, ask yourself why you lost the...
Imagine your political image is falling apart. Voters are walking away, and your poll numbers are dropping fast. So what do? Hold an ideathon. Just say the word, ideathon. That doesn't sound like a serious political plan. It sounds like something an HR department comes up with when it has run out of ideas. This is the Democratic Party. The party associated with FDR, JFK, and yes, we can. Yet now it is holding corporate-style brainstorming sessions, almost like a startup trying to pitch a new app on Shark Tank. Maher looks straight into the camera, and the frustration is obvious. He doesn't seem angry anymore. He seems worn out. Like a coach who has just realized his team is still trying to figure out the game plan moments before kickoff.
From common sense. The Democratic Party's current approval rating is 21%, which is only slightly more popular than Kanye's swastika shirts. Maybe that's why, according to a new Gallup poll, 45% of Democrats want the party to move to the center, which is up 11 points from 4 years ago.
That's the approval rating. Not just among Republicans or independents, but a much bigger warning sign. And then comes the part that really gets attention. 45% of Democrats themselves are saying the party needs to move closer to the center before things get worse. Think about what that means. These aren't political opponents. They're members of the party itself, the people who normally stand behind its candidates and show up for its events. Even they are signaling that something needs to change. This isn't just a small warning. It's a major alarm. And there's another point that often gets missed on cable news. This isn't simply about Republicans gaining ground or MAGA taking over. The bigger problem is happening inside the Democratic Party itself. The frustration is coming from within, while party leaders continue acting as if everything is under control.
This is actually...
I was being fair.
No, this is a huge Democratic Party problem. If you look at Democratic cities, they are terribly run. They have incredibly high taxes. It is impossible to build, so the cost of housing... Let me finish, I'll give you a chance. The cost of housing is crazy in places like New York and Chicago. If you look at Democratic states, you go look at New York versus Florida, okay? Roughly the same population. The budget of New York State is twice that of Florida. What do they have? Streets paved with gold? I live in New York. I pay the highest taxes in New York. You get nothing for it. And I think that is the image people have of the Democratic Party. Lots of taxes, lots of regulation, but nothing gets done.
Hey,
and I think
I live in LA.
Right. No, Philly. And I think, listen, the Democrats have to own this and realize the answer to everything is not more taxes, more...
Clip 4. This is where Rahm Emanuel steps in. And when someone with his experience speaks, it's worth paying attention. He ran Chicago and knows firsthand how city government works, and where its biggest problems can hide. Together, Emanuel and Maher bring up a subject Democrats would probably rather avoid: cities they control. If your political message is that you know how to govern, then the cities under your leadership are the clearest test of that claim. And right now, that record is difficult to defend. Housing costs can consume a huge part of a paycheck. Some streets feel poorly maintained or unsafe. Government budgets continue to grow, sometimes reaching enormous levels. Take New York and Florida. New York spends far more per person than Florida. Yet many residents feel they're getting less for their money. That's the reality voters experience every day. People aren't just listening to campaign speeches anymore. They're looking at the price of groceries, rent, transportation, and gas. Political arguments may win attention, but they don't make everyday expenses any easier.
And said, I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. Yes, there's the problem in a nutshell. Because Congressman Moulton sounds reasonable to me, but his campaign manager immediately resigned in protest. Let me make this as plain as I can to the smart people.
But this is where things get especially revealing. Watch what happens when a Democrat says something that sounds ordinary, not extreme, not revolutionary, just practical and relatable. Almost immediately, the party's internal critics come out. Social media erupts. Podcast hosts start piling on. Someone with a tiny following demands an apology and accuses the politician of using harmful language. Before long, that politician is either backing away from the comment or changing their public message to avoid more criticism. Then comes the real irony. Politicians who lose elections, damage their campaigns, or help lead the party in the wrong direction often find new opportunities waiting for them. They get media deals, podcasts, television appearances, and book contracts. Meanwhile, politicians who try to take a more practical or moderate approach can find themselves pushed aside. That creates a serious problem. Failure gets rewarded, while political realism gets punished. At that point, the party can start looking less like a healthy political organization and more like a closed system, where loyalty matters more than results.
Conclude by saying the reason I'm so mad at the Democrats is because as a voter, the issues that were important to me were democracy and the environment. And now, there's no one to champion or defend either of them because you, with your aggressively anti-common sense agenda and shitty
And that's where the situation really starts to unravel. Maher steps back and highlights something Democrats may not want to hear. They often present themselves as the courageous side of American politics, the people willing to stand up for what is right and challenge those in power. But look at what happens when controversy hits. Positions change. Strong statements become carefully edited responses. Every word gets reviewed, softened, and shaped to avoid upsetting the wrong audience. They present an image of confidence and courage, but when public opinion shifts, they can quickly change direction. That isn't real conviction. It's political performance. And the biggest problem is that voters have noticed. The audience that once applauded has been losing interest for a long time.
For months, Democrats have been saying, how is this even close? And they're right, it wasn't. Yeah. They could not conceive of a second Trump term, but they should have. When does America ever turn down second? I mean, come on.
Clip 7, but even that wasn't the strangest part. Whenever Democrats lose an election, the same pattern seems to repeat itself. First they blame the media, then misinformation, then social media algorithms, then they say voters were misled or confused. After that, the blame can move to Russia, Elon Musk, or almost anything else. There's one word that rarely seems to enter the conversation: us. Instead of asking what the party itself did wrong, the response often sounds like a group therapy session, where everyone is focused on outside forces. The bigger issue is accountability. If every defeat is blamed on someone else, there's little reason to examine the decisions that led to the loss. And without that honest self-review, the same mistakes are likely to keep happening.
When a book questioning the sudden uptick in transitioning children was released, a trans lawyer with the ACLU named Chase Strangio tweeted, "Stopping the circulation of this book and these ideas is 100% a hill I will die on." How very civil liberties of him. Chase, by the way, has just been named one of the grand marshals of this year's New York City Pride March, along with 3 other trans people and a lesbian. What's missing here? Oh, right, a gay man. That's where we are now. Gay men aren't hip enough for the gay pride parade.
And the tone changes. Maher stops sounding like a comedian and starts sounding more like a historian looking at a pattern that keeps repeating. What he describes next goes beyond any single policy. It points to a deeper cultural divide. The same words can be judged very differently depending on who says them. Empathy can seem selective. Forgiveness can depend on which political side someone belongs to. Even the idea of what makes someone a good person can shift as quickly as the latest online trend. The message may be about bringing people together, but the result can feel like more separation. Every new controversy creates another dividing line between Americans. At that point, this is no longer just about political strategy. It becomes a broader warning about the direction of the country and how deeply divided it has become.
And it's okay to ask questions about something that's very new and involves children. The answer can't always be that anyone from a marginalized community is automatically right, trump card, mic drop, end of discussion. Because we're literally experimenting on children. Maybe that's why Sweden and Finland have stopped giving puberty blockers to kids. Because we just don't know much about the long-term effects. Although common sense should tell you that when you reverse the course of raging hormones, there's going to be problems. We do know it hinders the development of bone density, which is kind of important if you like having a skeleton. Fertility and the ability to have an orgasm seem also to be affected. This isn't just a lifestyle decision, it's
Then Maher raises one of the most sensitive subjects in American politics: children, schools, and medical treatment related to gender identity. The mood in the studio changes immediately. It's clear this is a topic people are extremely cautious about discussing. But Maher isn't simply trying to provoke a reaction. He is raising a question that many parents say they have struggled to ask openly. Why did so many schools, media outlets, political leaders, and other institutions appear to adopt similar positions at nearly the same time? The concern is not only about the policy itself. It's also about whether people felt free to question it without being attacked or labeled. When major institutions seem to move together without much visible debate, people can begin to wonder whether they are seeing genuine agreement or simply following the same established approach. And once voters start questioning how that consensus was formed, trust can disappear quickly.
And this is a phenomenon we need to take into account when we look at this issue. Yes, part of the rise in LGBT numbers is from people feeling free enough to tell it to a pollster, and that's all to the good. But some of it is, it's trendy. Penis equals man? Okay, boomer. Remember, the prime directive of every teen is anything to shock and challenge the squares who brought you up. It's why nobody gets a nose ring at 56. And if you haven't noticed that with kids doing something for the light...
Here's another trap Democrats seem to keep falling into, and it's becoming difficult to ignore. When a controversial or extreme idea enters the conversation, party leaders often avoid confronting it directly. Instead of clearly rejecting it or explaining their position, they sometimes stay silent. That silence can create its own message. Voters may interpret a lack of response as approval, even when that wasn't the intention. And once that perception takes hold, Republicans don't necessarily need to create a complicated argument. They can simply point to the controversy and let voters draw their own conclusions. The bigger problem is that the Democrats leave room for their opponents to define the story for them. Then,
finally, new rule, someone must explain to Democrats what binary means. In America, we've got dozens of flavors of pretty much everything. Doritos and Gatorade, Oreos, Pepsi, Triscuits, Pop-Tarts, but we only have two political parties. Most democracies have a parliamentary system with many parties. We don't. We don't. With us, it's always plain or peanut. Cream or suppository? That's what we...
Now look at the situation in the simplest possible terms. Your opponent is loud, unpredictable, controversial, and constantly surrounded by legal and political drama. A large part of the country already has a negative view of him, and almost every week, he gives his opponents another opportunity to attack his record. Yet Democrats still struggle to turn those opportunities into political victories. That suggests something deeper than one bad news cycle. It points to a larger problem with the party's message and public image. When your opponent keeps giving you openings and you still can't take advantage of them, the problem may not be the media, the timing, or the circumstances. The problem may be your own strategy. Maher's basic point is simple. If you can't present a clear, steady alternative to political chaos, then the issue isn't just communication. You may not have a convincing message at all.
Bernie Sanders says we should let the Boston Marathon bomber vote. Why? Is there a great clamoring to give deranged serial killers more of a voice in civil society? Is Hannibal Lecter thinking, I love Trump for his narcissistic personality disorder, but Sanders really gets voters like me? Now, I'm sure you can make an argument for this, but we're trying to win an election here, and this just feeds into what Trump is.
The deeper issue is identity. Some of the language used by Democratic politicians and activists can sound so technical or unfamiliar that even ordinary Democratic voters may struggle to explain what it means. Terms such as Latinx, birthing person, and justice-involved individual can feel disconnected from the way most people normally speak. The problem isn't necessarily that voters are offended. Often, they're simply confused. And confusion is a serious problem in politics. People need to understand a party's message quickly and clearly. If supporters need a glossary just to explain what the party stands for, then the message has become too complicated. At that point, you're not giving voters a clear platform. You're giving them an assignment.
69% of voters say they dislike Trump personally, and there's no sign anything can change their minds. But Democrats' reaction to that is, okay, but let's try. Let me help you. You don't need to be 100% Twitter approved on every issue. Twitter is not America. Most of America, all...
Cleep 13. Here's the final point, and it may be the one people remember. About 69% of Americans have an unfavorable view of Trump. That should give Democrats a major political opening, yet they repeatedly struggle to turn that advantage into support. Instead of making their case in simple everyday language, they can come across as if they're correcting voters, explaining what they should think, or focusing on words and issues that many people don't connect with. When voters are giving you an opportunity and you still can't win them over, it's worth looking inward. That leads to the larger argument Maher is making. The Democratic Party isn't struggling simply because America became less compassionate. It isn't losing because voters were fooled or because misinformation took over. The criticism is that the party has drifted away from ordinary voters. It has become too worried about offending its most vocal activists, too dependent on complicated language, and too uncomfortable with direct, straightforward communication. Maher isn't necessarily destroying the party. He's shining a light on problems that were already there. Now the real question is whether Democrats can rebuild their message without losing sight of who they are, and whether they can do it before the next election exposes those weaknesses again. What do you think? Is Bill Maher one of the few people willing to speak honestly about liberal politics? Or is he